Okay. I think we are streaming now. Yeah, there we go.
The same strategy to everybody.
Hello.
I really wish more girls would open their eyes to their environment a little bit more instead of everyone's face being stuck in their phone. Or you should never walk around with headphones on either, and I see that all the time. You shouldn't do it.
We each have been given the responsibility for our own safety. The government's not going to do it for you, and the police are not going to do it for you, and the corporation that puts lights and security guards at the parking lot is not going to do it for you. It's going to come down to you doing it for you. And there are ways in which you can cooperate with your attacker that clearly I would recommend you avoid. One of them, wearing the headphones when jogging through the park. The very nature of jogging is that you're moving from environments that change into environments that change. It's not one place. And of the senses, hearing is the one that is most volumetric. It means it's all around, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. Vision is actually far less valuable. But hearing is everywhere. That sound of the tennis shoe squeaking on the sidewalk behind you is enough to get your attention. But not if you're wearing headphones and listening to music. And it gets a step worse with the headphones, because not only do you disable the main survival sense that we have, but you've told everybody around you that you've done it, because there are those wires that say, to the right kind of predator, I am your victim. Here's the hard part of this message. The hard part is, you mean I should just be allowed to listen to music? You mean I can't just listen to music like everybody else?
Men can have that joy of the listening to the soundtrack of their day while they walk. And I mean, music is everything to me. Like walking the streets of New York with earbuds in is like, it's my #1 favorite thing.
It's all about context. Where the circumstances you're walking around in a crowded environment, on the sidewalk in New York, fantastic. I don't love it for the ability to hear a car tire screeching or a car horn or a car engine as you cross the street, but it's not a violence issue. But alone, jogging in a park, I think it's a big mistake.
There's not too much happening here.
It's a jagged pill to swallow.
See what else we've got.
This is a hard reality. I wish it wasn't this way.
Right.
My point on all of this is only that people be aware of it. Be conscious about what you're choosing to do. Reality, reality, reality. That's the key. Because that's where you can see everything coming.
Right. You can't say, I'm not going to be aware because I shouldn't have to be.
That's what people do. So it's about empowering people to understand what are the pre-incident indicators of violence, and am I seeing them right now? And if I am, I want to get out of this situation. I want to start using my...
If you're just coming in, I've not stated my opinion on this. We're going to watch this, and all I've asked viewers to do is just try to be aware of what bias that they have about this topic before watching the video, and just try to give the video the benefit of the doubt, and then we'll talk about it. Why I'm asking you to give it the benefit of the doubt, I think it is always better to listen to media with the benefit of the doubt, because I think it actually primes you to hear what they're actually saying the most accurately. Because it's going to be really annoying to talk about this if some of you have watched this and then got completely the wrong interpretation of what the video is saying. That would be annoying.
Advantages. And the idea of staying present in the current moment.
The bias in the video is also strong, obviously. You can identify that as well. Just identify yours as well. Because your bias doesn't make you right. It just exists, and we all have it, and it's super normal and human.
Is the key to being aware of people in your environment who might act in a predatory way. Being alert is not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about being on edge at all. I'm simply talking about being open to what actually is.
Does our dependence on electronic devices, cell phones, get in the way of using our senses?
It really does. Human beings now are choosing to distract themselves. I was on a subway platform in New York, and every woman I saw was doing that. There was nobody not doing that in some way, looking down, giving their entire attention to something that takes them out of the present moment and out of the present environment. As soon as this happens and all your attention goes there, the whole rest of the world falls away. And you can be sure that your predator is not texting. And your predator is not thinking about answering an email or responding to a phone call right then. He's looking very attentively at you, not paying attention, completely engrossed in this. And so being aware of the circumstance that you're in and the situation you're in is very important. Go ahead.
I have a question about, is there any advice you would give if alcohol is in the equation? Because I find it hard to follow your intuition more when you're not in your right mind.
So your question contains the answer. So many cases that I've been involved in after the fact where people have come and wanted to understand better what happened to them and what they could do involve alcohol, both on the...
Just be aware there's going to be actually another bias that I didn't mention, which is there's going to be a lot of people who watch this, particularly often more like women, who are going to be annoyed to hear the advice that he's giving of being like, maybe we don't tell women not to wear headphones. Maybe we tell men not to rape, or like that kind of leaning.
Testing.
So all those biases are there. Just listen with the best of faith you can.
The victim's part and the offender's part. You know, there is nothing more anti-nature that a being of any kind could do than turning off its various sensory resources, right? We don't want to be deaf, we don't want to be blind, and yet we're both if we're drunk. To voluntarily say, in effect, to nature and the universe, thanks for all these fantastic resources, I'm going to shut them all down right now because I want to feel different. I want to change my state. It's a mistake. I should clarify this. Drinking is one thing, drunk is another thing. A glass of wine is fine for people who think it's fine. It's not a problem. But around being drunk is a tremendous amount of victimization. Yes, go ahead.
The few times that I have been a victim is because I let my guard down and didn't pay attention to my intuition. Once I knew the neighborhood, when I walked in the daylight off the bus, I said to myself, this is not a good neighborhood to be walking at night. And then I continued to drink wine at my friends for dinner, and they called a cab, and I said, it was taking too long. I'm just going to go take the bus like I always do. And I walked out into that neighborhood. And the minute I did were 4 or 5 boys on that street. And the only thing that kicked in was run, because they had already started harassing me. But I had 4-inch heels on, and running from 4 teenagers wasn't happening. I was lucky enough to fall right at a bus stop, and a bus driver jumped out and peeled the kids off of me. Never knew what their intent was or anything.
Thank you for sharing all that. And in hearing your story of the things that were disadvantages for you, A, the environment itself, the neighborhood, B, having been drinking, not what
I was lucky enough to fall right at
Testing,
a bus stop,
testing,
jumped out and peeled the kids off of me.
testing,
Never knew what their
testing,
intent was or anything.
testing.
in hearing your story, don't wear them.
I carry flats in my purse now.
It's a really good idea. And, you know, some people will hear what I just said and say, that's outlandish. You should be able to wear whatever you want. All fine. I'm glad to take the criticism. But that's part of how prepared you are to deal with, let's say, getting from point A to point B at night, using the bus, using the taxi, using the subway. The reality is there are environments in which 4-inch heels don't do you any good.
When there's like a guy in a bar and they won't leave you alone, I feel like I can't really do anything without being accused of like being rude and impolite and like a bitch, basically.
Niceness is a very overrated attribute in both men and women.
Absolutely.
On the part of people who are targeted, niceness is a true problem because it says you ought to smile, you ought to be polite, you ought to be open to my approaches on the street, whether you want that approach or not. Women in the culture are not allowed to say no.
I had Oprah on in the background. I remember her emphatically holding up your book. You know, I'm a woman in America, and we've all, I think, been trained by our culture to some degree to be much more polite and to not be so assertive and to not be so pushy and to not ask questions that are uncomfortable.
I've heard parents say, well, I don't want my child to learn to be unladylike or impolite or, you know, whatever. And I don't often say this, but I have in my mind, oh, so being beaten up or raped or murdered is ladylike? Really? I don't think so.
The invitation to keep someone in your environment is at the beginning of almost all criminal victimization, right? You have to control above all who's in your environment and not feel compelled to engage with every man who wants to engage. And no joke, it comes with a cost.
So we are watching notsoerudite's podcast or stream here. We're watching some video. We're supposed to be keeping an open mind to check our biases. So let's see where this goes. I'm not sure exactly what's gonna happen. Just sort of getting back into the swing of this streaming stuff. Got some ideas for some other content. Hold on, I need to just got some ideas for some content that we will be examining. I'm putting together my thoughts about philosophy, about the positions that I want to hold, about thinking and personal transformation, and how to live well. I'm starting sort of at the point where I'm thinking about things in terms of it's okay to be where I'm at. It's okay for everybody to own and be where they're at, acknowledging that I have severe flaws in how I think and process things, but the purpose of what I want this channel to be about is owning that spot where you are and improving on it in a kind of touch grass, living life sort of way. So there is some performative contradiction that I'm doing it in this space. I'm not sure if it's just inspiration that I want to impress upon whoever might watch this, but I want it to be potentially more than that. I want to examine if this medium, this space, can be more than that in a way that, and this may be a cringe way of putting it, but like in the very least leads to my own beautification of how I am as a person, personal beauty in terms of how one is in the world. So I'm watching her content because I like what she says about thinking. She's a good psychology person. not going to be my primary content, but easy place to start. And we'll clip and ship later and see what happens. So, but yeah, probably gonna talk about some Vervaeke content. Maybe mix that up with some Peterson content just to get those views coming in. Because I'm trying to, make a little bit of a living while I'm doing this. But definitely into the weird, like, meta-modern space. Also want to do some, is it Ian Sinclair? I can't remember his name right now. I always forget. But I want to talk about sort of some aspects of my lineage. I'm still sort of getting my thoughts together. Maybe talk about boundaries. I've been playing with this idea of, like, how there's debate bros, but maybe I could be a dialogos bro, which sounds obnoxious to say out loud. But, let's just see where things go. I'm open to whatever's going to happen. So I'm going to turn this back on, and we will see what is being talked about.
I turn around and I see someone like 6'4", like 270 pounds. He's big. And I had a funny feeling. Then second thought was like, oh, he's African-American, don't be that person. So I felt guilty about that thought, turned around and smiled and waved and kept walking. And then I was thinking in my head, oh, maybe he's a football player at the high school. And
telling the story you want to hear.
yeah, I was trying to beat it down, and I didn't want to make this person feel bad. And then I turned around and smiled again. And as I was turning around, he'd gotten a lot closer. And next thing you know, he like pushed me to the ground. He knocked me down. I was not expecting it at all. And my bag got twisted on my arm, and he tried to pull it and then was going to kick me in the face. I always thought in those moments I wouldn't be able to scream, but I managed to. And he took off with my purse and then jumped in a getaway car, and I realized it was all planned. Afterwards, when the cops came and I was telling him about what had happened, he said, you should just cross the street. And I thought, well, it was a block away from my house. I didn't want to be rude. I didn't want to signal like I'm scared of you, because I thought that might be rude. I remember the thing that I was really pissed about was like I smiled at him twice, and then he still mugged me. I thought like maybe if I was nice to him, he wouldn't do this to me.
Well, I'm sorry that happened to you, and I'm glad that it wasn't more serious. And I want to share with you, as is often the case when I hear someone's story of victimization, that a lot of the answers are contained in your story. And you said several times, I didn't expect it. Of course you did expect it. Right? That's why you turned around and you used a strategy you thought would be a good strategy. You felt he was too close. You reacted to the fact that he was so big, and you went through the whole dialogue in your head to discount it, but you did get the signal. It's a different kind of thing than literally being attacked as if somebody jumped on me from behind me right now and I didn't know anybody was there. I want to talk about that for a second. There are basically two strategies of human predation. One is the power predator, and the other is the persuasion predator. The power predator is sort of like a bear, just charges you and knocks you down. Very, very rare. Much more rare, because that one requires a lot of skin in the game on the part of the predator, and he doesn't get an opportunity to assess the person that he's attacking very well. The far more common one is the persuasion predator. The persuasion predator persuades you to participate. The circumstance you're talking about is a mixed model, because he didn't come out of nowhere by any measure. Yes, he used violence, and you could say you didn't see the escalation, but I will submit to you that you actually knew he was getting closer. You heard the first footstep.
I heard his footsteps, yeah.
And already, look, there's a nuclear defense system around each of us all the time. And I can tell you right now that if I heard a sound behind me when I know there's nobody behind me, I'd react to it. And I would register it and want to figure out what's going on. And I might, in this room right now, I might look at all of you to see if all of you are looking off at something behind me. Not that I'm in danger, but rather that it's a surprise, and I'm constantly registering, as we all are, we're constantly registering what's going on in our environment. And the footstep too close to you is one of the very, very best pre-incident indicators. Now, I don't like to say to somebody who's been victimized, well, you should have done this, or you should have done that. Because the reality is, you're here, you've survived that, you're able to tell the story, and it is not fair for anybody to say, it would have been different if, right? If you had crossed the street. Look, to the police officer who gave you that advice, he may have been right, he may have been wrong, I don't know what was on the other side of the street or what the circumstance was. But the belief that simply crossing the street is somehow the magic amulet, the lifesaver that will always work. If that were the case, we'd have no victimization in America. You'd have no muggings if it were just a matter of crossing the street. And I always ask, what prevents your attacker from crossing the street with you? You haven't gone through passport control to get there. It's just the other side of the street. And it may be better or worse. For all we know, the other side of the street held many more advantages for your attackers and many disadvantages for you. We don't know. The other side of the street might have held a little alleyway that you could be pulled into and victimized much more profoundly. And all we can really assess is what happened, right? Now, for the next time, you might do it differently, right? I like, as a general concept, turning around and giving people a look that says no more, then I know you're there. That's really the extent of it.
You advocate for in the book, kind of when you feel like you're being followed, you need to turn around and say, I see you.
Yes.
I wonder if it's almost harder these days, because that eye contact is so rare. And eye contact, as we know, is a sign of aggression or a sign of intimacy, or it can represent many things. But we're really losing basic eye contact with each other.
It's true. If someone is being followed or somebody's standing too close to you, the right thing to do is to turn around and look straight at them. And you don't say anything, but this communicates, as an animal does in nature, communicates to a predator, I do see you're there. And that's really very significant and important in terms of reducing victimization. But young people aren't used to looking at anybody now, and so it's a harder thing to teach.
Since I was little, at least, you know, adults are always saying, don't be scared, and you get these messages to be fearless. I actually have a necklace that says fearless in Sanskrit as a reminder to be courageous in all of these sort of situations, but I realize that there's a lot of benefit to paying attention to that fear.
Well, of course, you know, they're not in conflict. Courage and fear are two entirely different things. Courage, very valuable thing to remember about courage is that courage is always a choice you make. It's not a feature of a human being. There's no human being who's just courageous, because that would be stupid, right? But courage is a choice to act in the face of fear. Fear is absolutely not a choice. And courage requires fear as a component. It's not courageous to do something if I'm not afraid of it. Now, there's no courage sitting here right now. But if we were on a 3,000-foot cliff, then I have fear of falling off, and then it takes courage to stand at the edge of the cliff. Fear is a component of courage, right? Now, that's not true in the other sense. Courage is not a component of fear. Fear is intended to be a brief signal in the presence of danger. It's not something that you want to push down. And it's not something that you want to get courageous about. You want to register the signal. Okay, what's that about? And listen to it. One hopes you could go through your whole life without feeling fear. It can happen. But if you feel it, then the key is to register it. And the idea that you should be fearless, that's crazy. That's like me saying that to the mouse. Just be fearless. Just forget about that cat. Fear is a feature of your being that is there for a reason. Now, should you live in fear every second? Of course no. I think that would be highly destructive. But listening to fear when it comes, very important. I want to go back to something with you particularly, and that is dragging around the belief that you caused your victimization by not crossing the street extends your victimization. It continues the feeling of, I made a mistake here. The reality is, many kinds of victimization are simply not preventable. The circumstance, the situation, the moment, the person, the predator, and many could be worse, and many could be better, right? Let's look at the reality. 6'4", 5'1". Okay, sorry, people are so protective of that last name. All right, 5'2", 6'4", an intention to be your predator, working with somebody else, intending to do it, having already selected you as his target. And I can tell, by the way, looking at you now, that this has some resonance for you, that you have carried around the idea that you should have done something differently. True?
Sure, absolutely.
Well, let me give you something else, that you are in fact small, 5'2", as you corrected me. If we were on the plains of Africa, and we saw all the antelopes, and some of them were big and muscular and fast running, and some of them were small at the back of the group, who would we say is more likely to be victimized?
The little ones?
Of course, right? The little ones who have pure physical options. In nature, who's the head of the gorilla pecking order?
We're watching this video supposedly to determine
and so you are yourself, and I ask you to give yourself a break. You are walking
They're
around
bringing
in a
up
world in which
someone who
that
gets
is
attacked.
a physical disadvantage. Now, you have a whole bunch of emotional and
not
mental
really sure
advantages
where
that you can bring to the
we're
table,
going
but
with
that's just
this.
the reality. If we were a bunch of animals in Africa talking about this, it'd be a no-brainer. And so this is something to accept and not try to talk yourself out of being wary when you feel wary, or being concerned when you feel concerned.
You know, men are bigger. They can kill me. You know, and so I've developed a healthy fear, I think. But that healthy fear makes you a little bit fearless in that you're willing to protect yourself.
I know you don't like the idea of being afraid all the time, and I certainly don't encourage you to be afraid all the time. One of the things I hope happens here is that you walk out of here at the end with more confidence and with more certainty that you will listen and you will register the signals when they come. Because listen, we want the signals. There's not an animal in nature that would say, hey, let's turn off that damned annoying fear that I get all the time when I'm near the lion.
Yeah, and I think that actual, repressing that fear actually makes I feel more sick with it, you know, because it's a lot more effort to sort of suppress it than to just address it and keep yourself safe or something.
And as you ought to feel more sick with it, because what are you repressing? An absolute gift of nature. One of your components. It'd be like squeezing your kidney. This is as real as your kidney. This is a component of you that's there for a reason. And you have a right to be safe, and you have a right to use the resources that you have, and the number one resource before your fingers in somebody's eyes or kicking somebody in the balls or screaming or any of the other resources would come into play is your intuition. That's the number one resource. It's like you can get a signal. You can't. You could get a signal earlier than other people do. If you work on this, and it only means working on listening to yourself. All of these ways that you get an opportunity to say, let me assess my situation and change it, change the environment. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, what did happen? You were walking your dog when that happened? Did the dog run off or bark? Or
no, the dog barked. She was like a 3-pound dog. Like, dog was actually worth more than my bag.
Yeah.
You know,
Look how quickly we registered here, and you said, the dog's just a little 3-pound dog. And so give yourself the same gift, which is accept it, right? So I'm not talking about you as if there's some deformity here. I'm talking about you as if this is you. And it's good to know. No different than if you were, as I hope you will be one day, 85 years old, you would register and accept the fact that, gee, I'm not going to be as fast as I used to be. I'm not going to carry the same punch I used to carry. If you looked around the arena and you're going into combat and everybody else was 250 pounds and you were 80 pounds, you wouldn't ignore that fact.
Sure. I mean, getting mugged 3 times in 3 different cities, I'm like, okay, obviously I'm the common denominator. And I've known other people that have actually, a cross-section of my friends, not very many have been mugged. I mean, in all 3 cases, I've been pushed And there was one time I was at the ATM, and from behind, someone pushed me so hard I got knocked out, and a cab driver came and took me to the hospital.
And isn't that interesting from the point of view of how you now treat yourself about it? It has no charge.
It does, you're right, because that I feel like that could happen to
Of course.
anybody. Whereas the other one, I beat myself up because I ignored my intuition.
So what can you change? And I'm talking about now what you can do going forward, not lessons from what happened to you. Those are done.
Okay.
Lessons from what we're talking about here. One of the things you can't change is your size. Maybe you are a more likely predatory prize than somebody else. The other thing is making direct, I see you there, eye contact. The other thing is losing the smile in interactions with strangers. It's just not relevant. It's not a necessary component with strangers. It doesn't get you anything.
In my head, I remember thinking, if I'm nice, they'll leave me alone.
I hear you, but tomorrow you won't.
No, not tomorrow.
Right.
It's just a matter of reframing things. It's a shift in perspective that he managed to do with just some few insightful sentences that completely made something very complicated in my head very, very simple. And you know, when it's simple in your head, you can follow through a little bit better.
Do you think you'll feel safer or more at risk after this?
Absolutely safer.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about it. So, we'll go through the pros and cons, okay? Here, I'll even pull up a little paint thing. I know, I just love my paint. Yum, yum, yum. All right. You guys see this? It's really small. To go in half an hour to the podcast thingy. Just a heads up, guys. I do have the podcast thing tonight. I know a bunch of people are kind of getting tired of the podcast. So if what we'll basically do is a vote on the Pickup Artist podcast. And if you guys want me to keep doing it, if the votes are there, we'll look into it. I'm probably going to start doing it bi-weekly at most. And if people are really not enjoying the Pickup Artist podcast that happens every Monday, we'll probably just look at dropping it. JR Paris, thank you for the sub. I appreciate that. Okay. High end. I know. High end graphical tools. Truly. Pros and cons of that. So, pro. So one thing that I think is good here, because I don't think it's all bad. I think there's a little bit of fear mongering that he does, but I don't think it's intentional. I genuinely think his goal is to just help. Because he doesn't just do women, by the way. I just picked the women one in relation to some thoughts that I've been having recently. He does this for men, for teenagers, for everyone. So if you're worried that he like only talks about women or is just biased about safety for women, he talks about safety for men too. Okay. So just to be clear, I just selected this video. I think it is true that women are socialized very often to dismiss their feelings, especially in the past. I think more and more recently, we've been encouraging women, in large part because of, I think, this guy's work, to not dismiss their feelings. The issue is we don't want to lean into them. So I wouldn't argue that fear is your greatest gift. Fear is a flag, just like any other emotion is. And ignoring those flags is a fool's errand, right? Ignoring your sadness flag, ignoring your anger flag wholly, and just dismissing it is stupid. However, your flags can be raised incorrectly. The issue is that women are taught to be nice first, right? They really are taught that. So if we go back to my little notepad, I put it in here. Pay attention to their fear. So paying attention to their fear means just noticing it, right? Because there are a lot of individuals when they share about like their stranger victimization, especially, it'll oftentimes be women who are like, I was really uncomfortable, but I just like wanted to ignore it. And it's like, well, you don't need to ignore your discomfort. The issue is, on the con side, you don't need to be an asshole in response to the way that you're feeling about something. There's got to be balanced. How socialized is it? Well, who knows? When it comes to like feminine, masculine things and stuff, I don't care. I have my views about how socialized and how not socialized it is. I also think more research is required to like firmly answer that answer. I just don't give a fuck. It just is the case that women seem to be this way. Whether they were taught to be this way or it's biological doesn't matter, because I'm not saying that they should or shouldn't be this way. I'm just saying that, just to be clear, women have fear, men have fear. Women are in many ways socialized to be polite. Or maybe it's biological. I think there's another thing. Okay, sure. I'll remove all of the etiology statements. Women are by nature, women tend to be more agreeable. Whether that's by nature or socialization or both, who gives a fuck, right? So who gives a fuck, right? So we have this acknowledgement that women are more agreeable on average and worry about boundaries being mean.
Okay.
This is very true. A shitload of women I talk to really struggle with this. They really struggle to say no because they feel like it's mean. They feel really bad. And to some degree, this is reinforced by our society, for sure. So these are all really good things. It also gives a couple of good tips. And it reduces survivor guilt. So a lot of people who are assaulted have some sort of experience, persist in this like maintained sense of like, I failed. That tends to not be very helpful, even if it's literally true. Even if literally I created the precise recipe to be assaulted, victimized in some way. Holding on to like guilt isn't the best thing.
It's just
what's better is to like, learn and
so
like, augment your behavior
cool
in the future to reduce the likelihood of those behaviors, right? So the guilt itself, like guilting somebody over being victimized, isn't very helpful. But what you can say is, well, regardless of who's at fault, what can you learn from it that would help keep you safer and feel more like empowered in the future? That's a better question. It's so nice having a working space bar. Oh my gosh. I think practicing basic situational awareness would go a long way in noticing and understanding your fear. Yes, which is what he talks about. Okay, situational awareness. I also think it's good that he says that he is honest about body size, right? Women are smaller than men. Think about on average I think when you norm the two populations, women are about 50% smaller bodily size. Women are smaller than men. That's real. And there's nothing worse, in my view, than trying to convince people of like a non-reality. So I think there's an element that like when women look at safety for themselves, it has to be a little bit different than men. So I think everyone should think about safety for themselves to some extent. In stranger situations, we'll get maybe to some of the cons. So he's got this misgiving where he said, right, I just have a random smattering of women. No. The most likely women to be coming to these types of courses are women who have already been victimized in the past. So there is a bit of a selection bias going on. I don't think that was a good sample bias because we know, I'll pull up the stats for you now that I was looking up while we were doing this. Hold on. Right. Here's a demographic breakdown of violent crimes in Canada. Here's another one from, where'd it go? Oh, sorry. Here's an American one. So what's really important to understand when it comes like safety and victimization. So I'm all about empowering women for safety. I think that that's a really, really, really important thing. I'm also about empowering men for safety, which means that we need to be aware of how different populations tend to be targeted and victimized. So my biggest issue with this guy's stuff is he focuses almost exclusively on stranger violence. Women are the least likely population to be targeted by, not the least likely. They're not the most likely. In fact, if we go here, Victim of violent crimes where a stranger was involved. Wait, sorry, that's the wrong one. Police data indicate that males between 15 to 24 made up the largest proportion of those victimized by strangers. Men between the ages of 25 to 34 were the next largest group, followed by young women. So men are significantly more likely to be targeted in stranger assaults than women. Young men and then adult men. So 15 to 24. So men between the ages of 15 to 34 are the most likely victims of stranger assaults. So not sexual assaults. These are typically meaning, this is probably including all assaults, but specifically this is stranger induced. So to be honest, if anyone should be taking the tips about how to keep themselves in public situations from strangers, it should be everyone. It's worth learning a couple of tips, but to be honest, this is better targeted for men because they're the most likely victims of this, right? Women are dominantly victimized by people that they know, which means that the safety protocols that you need as a woman for the most likely thing that's going to do harm to you is different than men. Men actually need more stranger safety skills, and women need more relational violence skills. Is there a way to find demographics of this data? I can post you the link. This is from StatCan. So I think StatCan releases all of their data. I'm pretty sure. So what I'll do for you instead is I will post the link to the StatCan study, and probably within there you will be able to find the free access data. I could be wrong. I don't work for StatCan, and I don't actually look at StatCan's like free access, but my understanding is usually stuff like this that's done by like Justice Statistics and stuff that the data will get released. Okay. So you might be like, okay, but that's Canada. True, that is Canada. Let's go to America. Most violent crimes by strangers were committed against males, while most by relatives were committed against females. So this is probably my first biggest con against this video, is acts talks about stranger violence against women. Talks about stranger violence when advising women. More important for women is, what is it? Relative relational violence. Okay? It is a little bit fear-mongering in that way. I really hate the movement for safety that says be, like, where you approach strangers with rudeness and coldness. Because, again, there's this issue where, in general, if I go back to the StatCan, there's a question that's posed in this right at the beginning, is police reported statistics indicate that crime rates in Canada, and in America, by the way, both of these are true, decreased for the 5th consecutive year in 1996. So this is 1996. This is maintained. I believe there was a slight bump in the second year of COVID, but specifically is for, like, I believe intimate partner violence mostly. But in general, we've just seen a downward trend in crime. So similar trends have been noted in England, Wales, and the United States. Results from victimization surveys confirm this trend. Yet despite this decrease in crime, many Canadians remain fearful of being victimized. In fact, what we're seeing is that there's an increase in fear of victimization, while there is a decrease in victimization overall, which is the question of, now we're being plagued by a fear that isn't real, right? It is probably better to fear that your highly processed food is going to give you, like, diabetes or other, like, major long-term health conditions than it is to fear stranger assaults in 2022. I'm not saying to have no tactics of safety for stranger assaults. You definitely need to try to recognize if you're at risk of something like this and protect yourself as best as possible. But the fear around this stuff is very silly to me. And this is why, for example, I used to listen to, like, My Favorite Murder and those types of podcasts, and I got really irritated because it said things like, no more smiling. I would argue it's a broadly viewed as a feminine trait to be, like, kind and empathetic and warm towards others and kind of accepting and agreeable. It's kind of viewed as like a traditionally feminine thing. Hence, women are more agreeable on average, right? I'm not claiming where it's coming from. You can, if your bias is that it's nurture, then it's nurture. If your bias is that's biology, sure. I don't give a fuck. Not the point of the conversation, okay? The idea that we should tell women that smiling is the thing that they should remove seems like the worst idea ever. Because I think the fact that, for example, like women's natural response is to smile, I think more people's natural response should be to smile at each other and be kind. Because here's the thing.
Just be nice.
A smile isn't an invitation, right? A lack of boundaries could be, but a smile isn't that. I don't think smiling at the stranger is the issue. I don't think her smiling at him was the issue. And like he said, they had this planned. Whether she smiled at him or not wouldn't have changed the assault in the case of the woman who got pushed down and her bag stolen, because he ran into a getaway car, which means that they were planning it. They had picked her probably because of her size and probably because of the location that she was in. And that's probably it. I don't think the smile was his like green light. So the idea that we should say no smiling or that you shouldn't be smiling at strangers, I think is not borne out in the data. I'm going to show you another study. I'm using a lot older studies right now, mostly because I just really like this longitudinal study, which is looking at basically 4 aspects of precaution that were assigned: vigilance, locks, neighbors, and professionals. In the district regressions that controlled for the 14 risk factor, precaution had no prevention effects on the occurrence of subsequent crimes. This model revealed that the use of neighbors was the only precaution not to increase fear of crime, although both locks and neighbors showed a capacity to buffer the effects of fear on generalized distress. It was concluded that the most promising strategy was protective neighboring. Altogether, the promotion of citizen-initiated prevention appears highly inadequate as a police response to problems of crime and fear. So that was a longitudinal study. I'll give you the name of this. Longitudinal study of the effects of various crime prevention strategies on criminal victimization, fear of crime, and psychological distress. What does this mean? This means this idea, for example, being hypervigilant of, what did they say in this study? Alertness. We've got alertness, locks, neighbors, and professionals. Locks and neighbors seem to have the most effect overall, which means
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I am falling asleep. So what I want to do is see if we can crank this puppy up a notch. You know, it was on the Lex Friedman podcast not too long ago. Mr. Jonathan Vervaeke, number 317. So what I want to do is watch this video.
And how are you connected to it, and how do you matter to it?
That's one way of trying to get at what is the source of meaning for you. Is if you were no longer there, you would like it to continue existing. That's not the only part of the definition, probably, because there's probably many things that aren't a source of meaning for me that maybe I find beautiful that I would like to continue existing.
Yes. If it contributes to your life being meaningful, you're connected to it in some way, and it matters to you, and you matter to it in that you make some difference to it. That's when it goes from being just sort of true, good, and beautiful to being a source of meaning for you in your life.
Is the meaning crisis a new thing, or has it always been with us? Is it part of the human condition in general?
That's an excellent question. And part of the argument I made in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis is there's 2 aspects to it. One is that there are perennial problems, perennial threats to meaning. And in that sense, human beings, right, are always vulnerable to despair. You know, the book of Ecclesiastes is, it's all vanity, it's all meaningless. But there's also historical forces that have made those perennial problems more pertinent, more pressing, more difficult for people to deal with. And so the meaning crisis is actually the intersection of perennial problems, finding existence absurd, experiencing existential anxiety, feeling alienated, and then pressing historical factors, which have to do with the loss of the resources that human beings have typically cross-historically and cross-culturally made use of in order to address these perennial problems.
Is there something potentially deeper than just a lack of meaning that speaks to the fact that we're vulnerable to despair? You know, Ernest Becker talked about in his book Denial of Death about the fear of death and being an important motivator in our life. As William James said, death is the worm at the core of the human condition. Is it possible that this kind of search for meaning is coupled or can be seen from the perspective of trying to escape the reality, the thought of one's own mortality?
Yeah, Becker and the terror management theory that have come out of it. There's been some good work around sort of providing empirical support for that claim. Some of the work not so good. So
which aspects do you find convincing? Can you steelman that case, and then can you argue against it?
So what aspects I find convincing is that human finitude, being finite, being inherently limited, is very problematic for us.
Given the extensive use of the word problematic,
Okay.
I like that you used that word to describe.
I sort of wasn't paying attention to what they were talking about. Let me just jump back a couple seconds. He brought up William James, something. Okay.
The reality, the thought of one's own mortality.
Yeah, Becker and the terror management theory that have come out of it. There's been some good work around sort of providing empirical support for that claim. Some of the work not so good. So
which aspects do you find convincing? Can you steelman that case, and then can you argue against it?
So what aspects I find convincing is that human finitude, being finite, being inherently limited, is very problematic for us.
Given the extensive use of the word problematic, I like that you used that word to describe one's own mortality as problematic. Because people sort of on Twitter use the word problematic when they disagree with somebody. But this, to me, seems to be the ultimate problematic aspect of the human condition, is that we die and it ends.
I think I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm trying to get you to consider that your mortality is not an event in the future; it's a state you're in right now. That's what I'm trying to. That's what I'm trying to shift. So your mortality is just a. We talk about something that causes mortality fatal. But what we actually mean is it's full of fate, and I don't mean in the sense of things that are pre-written. What I mean is the sense of the universe doesn't care about your personal narrative. You can just have met the person that is going to be the love of your life. It's the culmination of your whole project for happiness, and you step into the street and a truck hits you and you die. That's mortality. Mortality isn't just some far-flung event. It's that every moment we are subject to fate in that way. So you can think of lots of little deaths you experience whenever all the projects and the plans you make come up against the fact that the universe can just roll over them.
So death is the indifference of nature, of the universe to your existence. And so in that sense, it is always here with us.
Yeah, but you're vulnerable in so many ways other than just the ending of your biological life. Because it's interesting, if you rate what people fear most, death is not number one. They often put public speaking as number one.
Yeah.
Because the death of status or reputation can also be a profound loss for human beings and drive them into despair.
So, as the terror management folks would say, as Ernest Becker would say, that a self-report on a survey is not an accurate way to capture what is actually at the core of the motivation of a human being.
Sure.
That we could be terrified of death, and we've, from childhood, since we realized the absurdity of the fact that the ride ends, we've learned to really try to forget about it, try to construct illusions that that allow us to escape momentarily or for prolonged periods of time the realization that we die.
Okay, so first I took it seriously,
Yeah.
but now I want to say why there's some empirical work that makes me want to reconsider it. So terror management theory is you do things like you give people a list of words to read, and in those lists are words associated with death, coffin, funeral. And then you see what happens to people, and generally they start to become more rigid in their thinking. They tend to identify with their worldview. They lose cognitive flexibility. That's if you present it to them in that third-person perspective. But if you get them to go in the first-person perspective and imagine that they're dying and that the people that they care about are there with them, they don't show those responses. In fact, they show us an increase in cognitive flexibility, an increase in openness. See, so I'm trying to say, we might be putting the cart before the horse. It might not be death per se, but the kind of meaning that is present or absent in death that is the crucial thing for us.
By the way, to push back, I don't think you took it seriously. I don't think you truly steel-manned the case, because you're saying that death is always present with us, yes, but isn't there a case to be made that it is one of the major motivators? Nietzsche, will to power, Freud, wanting to have sex with your mother, all the different explanations of what is truly motivating us human beings. Isn't there a strong case to be made that this death thing?
Okay. What he just referenced, the Freud and Nietzsche, is it reminds me of, I think it was Freud, Nietzsche, and Marx, and the hermeneutics of, what is it? Freud, Nietzsche, Marx, oh, this is the hermeneutics of suspicion, right? So Paul Ricoeur, Marx, Nietzsche, Freud. Alright, if we go to Wikipedia, you can see the hermeneutics of suspicion is a style of literary interpretation in which texts are read with a skepticism in order to expose their purported repressed or hidden meanings. Hans Georg Gadamer, in his 1960s magnum opus Truth and Method, Wahrheit und Methode, offers perhaps the most systematic survey of hermeneutics in the 20th century. The title of the work indicates. Okay. Marx, Freud, and Nietzsche share a commitment to unmasking the lies and illusions of consciousness. They are the architects of a distinctive modern style of interpretation that circumvents obvious or self-evident meaning in order to draw out less visible and less flattering truths. Ricoeur's term has sustained an energetic afterlife within religious studies as well as in philosophy, intellectual history, and related fields. Something to just bring up here as we are watching this video. I'm not sure how much longer I'm gonna... I mean, this is a pretty long video, and this is mostly just me getting back into the weeds of learning this stuff. So I am going to watch for a little bit longer, but probably going to leave pretty soon. Especially given that nobody's watching. Okay. Come on, Lex. What you got to say?
Is a really damn good, if not anything, a tool to motivate the behavior of humans.
I'm not saying that the avoidance of death is not significant for human beings, but I'm proposing to you that human beings have a capacity for considering certain deaths meaningful and certain deaths meaningless, and people, we have lots of evidence that people are willing to sacrifice their biological existence for a death they consider meaningful.
Are you personally afraid of your death? Do you think about it? As somebody who produces a lot of ideas, records them, writes them down, is a deep thinker, admired thinker, and as the years go on, become more and more admired. Does it scare you that the ride ends?
No. I mean, you have to talk to me on all my levels. I'm a biological organism, so if something's thrown at my head, I'll duck and things like that. But if you're asking me, do I long to live forever? No. In the Buddhist tradition, there are practices that are designed to make you aware of simultaneously the horror of mortality and the horror of immortality. The thought of living forever is actually horrific to me.
Are those the only two options? You can, like, when you're sitting with a loved one, or watching a movie you just really love, or a book you really love, you don't want it to end. You don't necessarily always flip it to the other aspect, the complete opposite of the thought experiment. What happens if the book lasts forever? There's got to be a middle ground, like the snooze button. Sure, you don't want to sleep forever, but maybe press the snooze button and get an extra 15 minutes. There's surely some kind of balance. That fear seems to be a source of an intense appreciation of the moment, in part. I mean, that's what the Stoics talked about, to meditate on one's mortality.
Sure.
It seems to be a nice wake-up call to that life is full of moments that are beautiful, and then you don't get an infinite number of them.
Right. And the Stoic response was not the project of trying to extend the duration of your life, but to deepen those moments so they become as satisfying as possible, so that when death comes, it does not strike you as any kind of calamity.
Does that project ring true for your own personal feelings?
I think so.
Do you think about your mortality?
I used to. I don't so much anymore. Part of it, as I'm older and your temporal horizon flips somewhere in your 30s or 40s, you don't live from your birth, you live towards your death.
That's such a beautiful phrase. The temporal horizon flips. That's so true. That's so true. At what point is that? The point before which the world...
There's a depth here. So I'm 33. And when I was 29, about to turn 30, I had a goal, which was by the time I'm 40, I want to be wise. So 10 years. Do I think that I can achieve that? I don't really know. It's not really the kind of thing you can make a SMART goal, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time constrained. Like, it's not really something that you let me rephrase. There are ways to measure wisdom that are sort of being developed within psychology, to the extent that you want to believe those measures, what they do. It would be interesting to talk to Igor Grossman. Igor Grossman studies wisdom at the University of Waterloo. I wonder if I could reach out to him and talk to him about, come up with some questions and talk to him about wisdom. I wonder if he'd be willing to have a conversation, because if it is possible to measure wisdom and over time, that is, assuming it is some kind of a skill that can be developed, maybe it's worth looking into how one would assess that. I feel like a lot of psychological tests rely on you not realizing what they're testing for, and I feel like we ought to have some kind of a standard that's that we're able to use to self-assess and measure ourselves over time. But yeah, it would be interesting to cover like the different kinds of wisdom measures that are out there and how they are doing that work. Yeah, so I'm gonna keep watching the video.
Of opportunity and possibility is infinite before you.
Yeah, it's like Peter Pan. There's all these golden possibilities, and you fly around between them. Yes, very much. And then when it flips, you start to look for a different model. The Socratic, the Stoic model. Buddhism has also influenced me, which is more about, wait, when I look at my desires, I seem to have two meta desires. In addition to satisfying a particular desire, I want whatever satisfies my desire to be real, and whatever is satisfying my desire to not cause internal conflict, but bring something like peace of mind. And so
I just want to speak to some of phenomenology, like an experience. I was just sort of listening to this, and I was thinking about my my mission, my path towards this wisdom idea, and I just sort of had this like spatial feeling, like I was just in the space, sort of connected to my potential future self and my current present self, and I see that as a good sign. I mean, that's how I'm interpreting it. I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but yeah, it was a good feeling, so I thought I'd share. Yeah, cool.
I more and more move towards how can I live such that those two meta desires are a constant frame within which I'm trying to satisfy my specific desires.
What do you think happens after we die?
I think mind and life go away completely when we die. And I think that's actually significantly important for the kind of beings that we are. We are the kinds of beings that can come to that awareness, and then we have a responsibility to decide how we're going to comport ourselves towards it.
Can you linger on what that means, the mind goes away?
Like when you're playing music and the last instrument is put down, the song is over. Doesn't mean the song wasn't beautiful. Doesn't mean the song wasn't complex. Doesn't mean the song didn't add to the value of the universe in its existence, but it came to an end.
Is there some aspect in which some part of mind...
That's what I'm talking about. When I said the beautification of my soul, that particular line, I actually want to save that.
The song, last instrument is put down. To decide how we're going to that awareness, and then we have a responsibility to decide how we're going to comport ourselves towards it.
Can you linger on what that means, the mind goes away?
Comport ourselves towards it.
Okay. Thank you for bearing with me. Just saving that. And when is that? That timestamp is like 1524. Man, we are making pretty slow progress here. There is another video I'd like to watch. I have started watching it, but it's about racism. And one thing I will say about this meta-modern part of the web, the meaning web, is it's very, very white. And a person I've enjoyed, a person whose thoughts I've enjoyed, is Cornel West. I think he is just, you know, I just like his vibe, you know. And he addresses a lot of issues, I think, in a philosophical way. I don't have his book. I should get his book, but I'd like to watch some of his stuff. But there's another video I saw on the Stoa that was about racism, and I think that I was going through the first one. I've read it. I've got a document on the notes about it. I'm gonna go through the second one as well. But maybe that's something worth going through on stream. I mean, I don't have an audience right now, so it doesn't really matter what I do. I can just do whatever I want. So I gotta enjoy that while I can. I have a fair amount of ambitions for what this channel could be, though I don't know if they'll be realized. I think there are a lot of options for projects I could do. Maybe ideas that I've abandoned. I mean, this isn't the sole hum of the sole. The whole of my personality in this space, but it's an important part, and I think there are thoughtful people doing thoughtful work, and I just want to engage with it, you know. So we'll see where this gets me, but I just wanted to save that part of this video because it was dope. Alright, I don't need to hear him say it again. So
doesn't mean the song wasn't complex. Doesn't mean the song, like, didn't add to the value of the universe in its existence, but it came to an end.
Is there some aspect in which some part of mind was there before the human and remains after? Something like panpsychism, or is it too much for us limited cognitive beings to understand?
Something like panpsychism, I take it seriously. I don't think it's a ridiculous proposal, but I think it has insoluble problems that make me doubt it. Any idea that the mind is some kind of ultimately...
Yeah, I have to look at panpsychism. I know Whitehead has been getting a lot of traction, panpsychism. These are all ideas that are, you know, have a rich history. There's a lot of conversations that have been had about them. I don't pretend to understand half the things I listen to about this stuff, but that's sort of that's the whole embracing where we are in our journey or whatever. And can we wrestle with these ideas that are difficult, and in the wrestling of these ideas, does that make us better? So if we examine panpsychism, does that lead us to what does that say about life? I think there's it's important to okay, I'm getting a little scatterbrained. I'm gonna have to organize some of my thoughts about some things, because part of what I want this channel to be about is actually the things that we do in our lives, the ways that we practice, the things that we endeavor, that shape us as we shape them. And I don't know that concepts like panpsychism speak to that, but I find it interesting to think about. It's not really something that affects our ethics unless we're getting into how we ought to treat things if things have souls that we didn't consider as having souls. And that's a whole it's a whole other can of worms. It's like superimposing a human idea on the world. Yeah, it's just very complicated. It's very complicated, complex. Anyway, I didn't really say much there. I'm just Big thoughts, small brain.
Immaterial substance also has, for me, just devastating problems. Those are the two kinds of framework that people usually propose in order to support some kind of idea of immortality. I find both very problematic. The fact that we participate in distributed cognition, that most of our problem solving is not done as individuals but in groups, this is something I work on. I've published on that. I think that's important. But most of the people who do work on systems of distributed cognition think that while there's such a thing as collective intelligence, there's no good evidence that there's collective consciousness. In fact, it's often called zombie agency for that reason. And so, while I think it's very clear that no one person runs an airline, and there's a collective intelligence that solves that problem, I do not think that collective intelligence supports any kind of consciousness. And so, therefore, I don't think the fact that I participate, which I regularly and reliably do in distributed cognition, gives me any reason to believe that that participation grounds some kind of consciousness.
Okay, there's so many things to mention there. First of all, distributed cognition, maybe that's a synonym for collective intelligence. So that means a bunch of humans individually are able to think, have cognitive machines, and are somehow able to interact in the process of dialogue, as you talk about, to morph different ideas together, like this idea landscape together. It's so interesting to think about, okay, well, you do have these fascinating distributed cognition systems, but consciousness does not propagate in the same way as intelligence.
Yeah.
But isn't there a case, if we just look at intelligence, if we look at us humans as a collection of smaller organisms,
yes,
which we are, and so there's like a hierarchy of organisms. Tiny ones work together to form tiny villages that you can then start to see as individual organisms that are then also forming bigger villages and interacting different ways, and function becomes more and more complex. And eventually we get to us humans to where we start to think, well, we're an individual, but really we're not. There's billions of organisms inside us.
Sure.
Both domestic and foreign. So isn't that building up consciousnesses like turtles all the way up to us, our consciousness? Why does it have to stop with us humans? Are we the only, like, is this the phase transition when it becomes a zombie-like giant hierarchical village that first, like, there's like a singing angels and its consciousness is born in just us humans? Do bacteria have consciousness? Not bacteria, but maybe you could say bacteria does, but like the interesting, complicated organisms that are within us have consciousness.
I think it's proper to argue, and I have, that like a paramecium or bacteria has a kind of agency and even a kind of intelligence, kind of sense-making ability. But I do not think that we can attribute consciousness, at least what we mean by consciousness, this kind of self-awareness, this ability to introspect, et cetera, to bacteria. Now, the reason why distributed cognition doesn't have consciousness, I think, is a little bit more tricky. And I think there's no reason in principle why there couldn't be a consciousness for distributed cognition, collective intelligence. In fact, many philosophers would agree with me on that point. I think it's more an issue of certain empirical facts, bandwidth, density of connection, speed of information transfer.
Okay. I think that's good for now. I'm going to put a pause here. We'll come back to this tomorrow. I just wanted to just do something today to make a little headway on this streaming thing. Yeah, I don't know what I'm really doing here. I have a number of different Discords I'm a part of that I might reach out to people, see if they want to have some kind of conversation. I have my own Discord. I haven't advertised it yet on my channel, but might be a good time to start doing that. still figuring out my online persona, and you know, I have a hard time keeping the thoughts moving. I have to like stop and process and then come back and stop and process and then, you know, come back. But I'm trying to catch the flow, as it were, as in like you know, Csikszentmihalyi concept of flow, which is also another thing worth talking about. There's a lot to cover, a lot of beautiful things to address. So I'd like to explore these beautiful things, and I hope that you would join me on this journey, and maybe we can you know, enjoy some beautiful things. That said, thanks for tuning in. Whoever sees this in the future, I will catch you on the next one. All right, farewell.